Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage LA 36 reporter Jackie Karsh.
Good afternoon, everyone, or morning. It seems like it's a straightforward formula. You have a great product, plus great engineering and design that really solves a problem. Should be an instant success, but it's not always. It's never that simple. Here today to break down what it takes to scale a company into hypergrowth is first Jamie Montgomery, the guy who put this all together and a founder and managing director of March Capital Partners. George Kurtz, co-founder and CEO of CrowdStrike, a leader in cloud-delivered endpoint protection. And John Chambers, who led the tech giant Cisco through 2 decades of dramatic growth and now heads the venture capital firm JC2 Ventures.
John, George, thank you for being here today. For all of our guests from around, well, we don't have many global visitors this year for obvious reasons, but for all of you who've come in, we thank you for joining us, and we're doing everything possible that you have a productive, insightful, enjoyable, and healthy visit to Santa Monica. And anything we can do to address any of your concerns, please find me or any of our team. We're here to make this all work, and so far it's really been quite magical. And there's a great pleasure for me to be on the stage with 2 of my favorite executives to have a real heart-to-heart conversation about the challenges of scaling companies and providing some insights and perspectives and experiences for you. And we'll be candid. We appreciate it if we're pretty open that we don't get quoted later. So I not exactly Chatham House rules, but please use your discretion. And but with that, there's so much to talk about, and we've got a good amount of time here, and we're going to walk through a kind of a flow. And the subject is scaling. And George, you started in late 2011, really got going in 2012, and it's the fastest growing SaaS software company ever. George can't comment on that, but it is. And what was the secret to scaling? I mean, what was the real kind of? You look back on it, you say that was the magic that made it all work.
I'm not sure there's any secret other than lots of hard work, but I think when we started the company, one of the key elements for me was really getting the right people, and the most important thing was to find the right 20 people early on. And
right 20 people.
Right 20 people, and as a team. It wasn't just individual contributors, and it was irrespective of where they were. So one of our original architects is a guy, we call him Employee Zero. He got into college when he was 10, didn't go until he was 16, never took his SATs again, and he couldn't move from Minneapolis. And I said, I have to have this guy, I don't care, he doesn't need to be in California. And that was part of the culture when we started the company. It was to assemble the best team that could work together with folks who had the right expertise. And without having that core base, I don't think we'd have gotten to where we are today. And that was one of the early decisions that we made. And the second piece was then really around the culture and focusing on our mission to protect companies from breaches. And early days, a lot of people don't either know this or probably remember it. When you applied to CrowdStrike, you didn't apply to jobs at CrowdStrike. It was mission at CrowdStrike.com because it was a mission-oriented company.
So, all right, John, I mean, one of the things you just touched on for a second first is you're distributed. So that must be a good thing in today's age. You have teams in various cities working. You got the best talent where they were. Is that what you're saying? And so not the campus environment that Cisco, you had a number of central locations. John, what's different now about scaling than it was 5, 10, 20 years ago?
I think many of the principles are very similar to the growth that we saw 5, 10, 15 years ago, with the exception that it's much faster pace.
Yeah.
And with the exception that the market has become remarkably short-term oriented, even some of the VCs, Jamie. And that's why you see innovation in the larger companies slowing. But when you think about growth and scale, and I think always, if you agree with everything the 3 of us say, we failed today. We want to make you uncomfortable. We want to challenge you. How many startups are there in the room? Each one of you will probably come very close to breaking at 150 people, at 500, at 1,500, and 5,000. One of those touch points, and Jamie, almost all of the ones that I've touched have. You have not yet, George, so it's lots of curiosity on why you've done it so well. But if you think about scaling, the first thing is you've got to be in the right segment of the market at the right time. So you scale off of market transitions enabled by technology. The second thing is, I love your concept of building a great team, but candidly, what I bet on is the CEO. So the second thing I look for in the startups is a world-class CEO who knows what he knows, or she knows what she knows what they don't, who can build a good team within that. The third thing I look for is their sustainable differentiation in this. And I go straight to customers to ask where they are in terms of the ability to do it. And then do you get people around you who help you grow and scale on it? Because a startup has a problem every other week, where at a Cisco, we might have a serious problem every other quarter. And so it is how you help people navigate through that. And it's more, Jamie, often the success of the startup will be determined by how they didn't scale, but how they handled the setbacks as they were growing rapidly that many companies stall out on.
All right, George, what was your biggest challenge then, scaling?
Well, I think one of my early mistakes, it was a challenge and a mistake I made, was my original sales guy, I mishired in that in the early days. The three types of salespeople, just generally speaking: evangelical, scalers, and coin-operated. And I hired a coin-operated guy.
Now, I'm a sales guy, just so you know. I'm trying to figure out which one of the three I am.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any confusion on that, John.
Yeah. So I had hired someone who was really coin-operated.
Yeah.
Right, and put him in the evangelical role. And when he got to CrowdStrike, it was like, all right, well, let's roll everything out. And I said, well, yeah, it's all on the PowerPoint. And he said, well, yeah, but we got to do. I said, no, it only exists on the PowerPoint. This is what you have to sell is on the PowerPoint. And he could never, if it wasn't perfect and it wasn't there, he couldn't kind of get over that. So that was one of the early, I would say, setbacks. And then once we kind of got that sorted out and we had the right salespeople for the phase of the company, obviously we had the technology to back it up, but that's really when things started to accelerate.
John, why is a lot of talk about culture, but in your perspective, why is culture important? I mean, and when you look at companies, how do you assess the culture of ASAP or Unifor, and what suggestions would you have for this audience on that subject? Yeah.
Sure. The first is, I think, especially in Silicon Valley, we tend to think the most important thing for success for a startup is your strategy, the vision, your market you're in, differentiation.
Yeah.
And when I acquired companies, and I acquired 180 of them, I wanted to know that piece, but I was equally as interested in their culture and understanding it, and I would not acquire a company that didn't have a very similar culture.
Well, did you ever fail on an acquisition because of culture, or did you screen that out?
I came very close to failing. I walked on one of the bigger acquisitions we were going to do. I can say it in Boston. Now somebody will eventually figure it out. And we were there to do the final signing of the deal and announce the next morning. And during the middle of the discussion, it became obvious that the market had become aware of it. And my investment banker from the other side and the CEO of the company basically said, well, John, the market isn't aware of it. So they've insulted us twice. First, assumed we didn't know the market, and secondly, we couldn't track it back to where it came from on it. But I realized it was about trust and culture.
Yeah.
And we went back in the other room, and they were willing to do the deal when we started to leave at what we'd originally agreed upon. We left.
Yeah.
So you have to have the courage to walk when it's not right. But for the startups, one of the hardest things to learn is culture is as important as strategy and vision. And I didn't understand that at first as a young CEO. I think, George, you got it earlier than I did. And then what is your culture and how does it evolve every time? Are you truly a culture make innovation happen? Are you truly a family culture or not? Most startups will not be, nor should they be. Are you a culture of just do the right thing? Are you a culture that is really tied to your customer's success?
Right.
And do you create wins for your investors, your customers, your partners? Easy to say. Most companies do not do that. So it's what is your culture, has to be owned by the CEO, And it is more important, I think, actually, than your strategy in determining success. Why did WeWork break? Why did Uber break? Why did you see a number of other successes fail? It was because their culture failed.
George, on that subject, how would you describe the culture at CrowdStrike, and what's worked in that area, and where have you struggled?
Well, we spent a lot of time on it. So number one, as I talked earlier, it's really making sure that people have a sense of mission and purpose. We have to recruit in a similar pool to all the big tech companies, and they can pay a lot more, and making sure that people who come here want to be here for long term and solving a big problem, which is preventing breaches. Second thing is really just fanatical about customer success and outcomes. And we do that because I think everyone at CrowdStrike takes it personally if a customer has an incident or an issue on our watch. We will do anything for the customer to make sure they're secure. And if there's an issue, and every company has an issue, it's how you respond to it and those partnerships you build when there's an incident. And then the third area, I would say, there's a lot to it, but I try to make the company family-oriented. Our executive teams, outside of the office, our wives know each other, we go on vacations together, kind of rare things, because we enjoy the time together and we're very similar in the way we look at the world and what we want to do in building a company. So those are just some core principles, and the biggest thing for me is to make sure that our team understands that culture doesn't start at the top. Yes, there's a frame of reference from me, but there is a bottoms-up culture that we spend a lot of time on at the company, and we created a culture team that has no executives on it. These are spiritual leaders across the entire company, and we asked them to really, the culture's there, and yeah, it starts from me, but we wanted them to codify what our culture is so that we can live by those principles.
So what are the 3 words that would describe the culture at CrowdStrike?
3 words?
Yeah, or 5 words or something.
Okay, well, I'm going to give you a couple. Customer first, innovation, family, and I guess the last one is integrity.
Okay, that's good. John, both at Cisco under your leadership, CrowdStrike as well, the turnover, the involuntary, the voluntary turnover, people leaving, is remarkably low. Was at Cisco, is at CrowdStrike, and why do people leave in your sense? And we talk a lot about, we spend a lot of time hiring someone. They might, interview with 10 people. When they leave, maybe you have a half hour with them. You must have kept a lot of people. People want to leave, but they didn't. Walk us through the retention and why, from the top, and the mechanics of it, and how were you able to keep that number so low and keep that team together for so long?
So giving you the numbers first and then talking about how it's changed, because for the startups in the room, your retention of your employees is going to be 2 to 3 times more challenging than yours was just 7 years ago, and at least 3 to 4 times more challenging than when I started Cisco in terms of our growth path 25 years ago. Our attrition rate averaged 5% for 20 years. 5% voluntary. The industry average is 15. My own view is when you lost somebody, you lost an asset that probably would take $500,000 to replace them by the time you brought them up to speed, et cetera, on it. We decided we were a culture of family and that we wanted people to think about retiring with our company, even though most of them, when they're young, think they will live forever, so you take it a step at a time. And even our acquired companies, which usually run a 20% turnover after a company's acquired, once the golden handcuffs come out, ran 4%. And so we focused on that with a tremendous amount of emphasis. And part of it is what George articulated well, recruiting the right people who fit into your culture in the first place. And when you get a culture mismatched, get rid of them. But the mistake that so many people make with the startups is, you said it, Jamie, when you interview for startups, if you're not interviewing every candidate, at least through 10 different people, you're not doing the job of screening them properly. But yet, when somebody says they're going to leave, and let's just say that I'm one of George's employees, and I come to him and say, I'm going to leave. You can't talk me out of it. I want to thank you. Brilliant leadership. I've got a chance to be in a much higher position for 3 times the pay at another company. And I just can't tell you how much you've enabled my family to be there. And usually what happens at other companies, I think his is different, is the CEO tries to talk you out of it for about 10 minutes, realizes this is probably the right thing for you to do, and might have you talk to one other person, you're gone. I had 75% of the Cisco executives leave at one point in time, and I brought them back. When you lose somebody, you want to understand their real issue is almost never they're leaving for a better opportunity or more pay. Their number one issue, it's their immediate manager. The number two issue, they don't think they have a career path. Number three issue, they've been doing the same thing for too long. Number four issue is they don't think the CEO believes in them. You want to go back and figure out what it is. And then you do in startups, which allows for whether you're scaling companies at a tremendous speed, 65% growth for 10 years, and you can do the math on what happens there, or whether you're digitizing countries or you're thinking about retaining a person, you get an innovation playbook that you can run again and again with speed. So when we'd lose somebody, I would very simply meet with the person first, try to understand what the real issue was. About half the time I'd get to the real issue. The thing always in that first conversation is I bought 2 weeks. I was willing to compromise to 1, but I try to buy 2. You owe it to us. You've been so loyal for so long. We've been loyal to you. Give me 2 weeks just for us to really not finalize this and give me a chance to convince you to stay. Then I would run the playbook with tremendous speed. I could turn to Pankaj, who was the head of engineering. Pankaj, you've got the number 2 play. You know him well, want you to dig into what you're finding out, see if I've got this identified right. Tell him how important he is to staying. Yvette, you're the number 3 play. After we get the feedback from Pankaj, you're going to tell him or her what we need to do, what their career paths are. And all I'd have to do is say, you're the number 4 play, here's where you go. We didn't lose but 5 executives.
John, does this work in
20 years.
Does this work in marriage too, or?
Our spouses will often know us too well. So
that's always the CEO. It's always number 4 then, huh?
Yeah, well, it works the first time or two. If you get to your 3rd time, you're in trouble.
All right, it's all right. That's you got a great lesson from John about retention today. So one of the takeaways, John, thank you for sharing that. That's really insightful, and it's the human capital, as Mike talks about, the most important asset in the world is human capital, and human capital retention is critical to a successful organization. George, you talked about the velocity of growth, or I did, and you talked about the sales leadership personality. But what's the characteristics of the organization that's really contributed to your success in the sales area and scaling?
Well, first, I think you have to have the right mentality, and a lot of startups, they are just so focused on the technology, not really looking at go-to-market motion, not looking at the outcomes from our customer, and they're not selling value. We talk about it internally. People will come in and say, well, we need to set up a POC for the customer. We're like, you're not even talking the right language. Nobody buys a concept. We talk about proof of value, right?
Right.
What's their outcome? How do we demonstrate value? And I think that's really important. So number one is we spend as much time on the go-to-market motion and the scalability of our sales engine as we do on the scalability of the technology. And if you just do one to the detriment of the other, you're never going to get to where you need to be. And I think in a SaaS world, we have the benefit of we're always connected to the customer. We know what they do, right? We can actually provide more value within the platform.
You get feedback in real time.
Feedback, yeah. We're like, I don't know anyone else in security has like these in-app trials with your own data, and it goes into the inside sales machine. I mean, it's all.
Explain to everyone here the concept of frictionless sales. That's something I hear on the calls.
Yeah, so frictionless sales, and a big thing for me and our CFO, Bert, is to look at the unit economics and to really focus on being...
and how's that Joe Sexton being as a director?
No, the guy's the best. He's over there.
He's over there. He also chairs the comp committee, right?
No.
Keep going.
He's a modern-day Zig Ziglar, though. You should go meet him. But the thing is, for me, in the SaaS world, and I've sold all kinds of things over the years, and perpetual and appliances and everything, the platform should sell itself.
Yeah.
And we talk about in CrowdStrike this concept of consumerization, the enterprise experience. When you pick up an iPhone or an Android or wherever it is, I can do whatever I want. It's just there, right? I turn things on and it works. And that should be the same experience for an enterprise all the way down to an SMB. It should just work. And the thing for us is we already have data that's collected. Why not allow people to try things in our own platform, just like a consumer would with their own data, and then we tie that back to the inside sales machine. We create telemetry around that. And it's all about the intelligence on selling and removing friction so that the platform is selling itself.
Yeah. John, any comments on that?
I think you still need sales guys.
Yeah.
Little humor.
You need sales guys.
Yeah.
The fun part is, and I agree with what you said, you know you've got a hot product when the platform sells itself.
So when
But
you were
the mistake that people made, our Cisco peers, is they stayed thinking the platform would sell itself. They had a superior platform, they would win. We had a number of competitors in routing or switching or security or wireless or the data center who candidly, I can say it now, had a better product. We outsold them.
Yeah.
And they didn't get a sales machine that would compete with the values you said and focus on outcomes. And the customer wants outcome even more than they want the best product.
Right.
And then about the time some of our peers would begin to get their sales machine running, we moved to services where we had the best service operation in the industry, the most expensive,
Yeah.
but the highest margins, highest customer sat. So it is how do you evolve through that a little bit would be, the additional thoughts I would add.
Yeah. I think, I think, George, I mean, there's so many parts to it, but it's a big organization, 1,000 people or so in the last call I heard on, in the sales organization. So you've got a lot of feet on the street.
These are your numbers, by the way.
These are my numbers, yeah. But, you look at it, let's talk about customer success, because you need, what John was referring to as customer success. How do you think about customer success and scaling? And, it's something that our portfolio companies, ask us a lot about.
Well, it starts well before the sale, and then when you get the sale, the biggest mistakes I've seen company make is that they move on to something else. So
Yeah.
in our world, we get the deal done, we focus on getting them up and running and successful very quickly, and then we're subscription. It's all about net and gross retention. So we have quarterly check-ins. We understand, are they using the product? Are they not using it? Have they logged in? That's the beauty of a SaaS model. They haven't used the product in 3 months. What's going on?
Yeah.
Did we fail, or did something happen? And we've gone to people and we've gone back and said, we don't see you using it. And they said, well, that guy is no longer there, or he moved on, or health issue, right? So these quarterly check-ins are a huge deal, and I would recommend if you're selling services, obviously any product, that you have these check-ins, because if you just show up for the renewal right at the end of the year, that A, you're lucky to get the renewal, and B, you're not going to get the value and the dollars and the upsell that you want on it.
So you referred to a platform. When did you go in? Was that part of the original vision at CrowdStrike, was building a platform? And what were some of the key surprises or lessons learned along the way of building that platform?
A lot of lessons learned from other places where I've been. And I think the big thing for me is when I looked in 2011, 2009, 10, and really 11, looked in the security industry, there really wasn't a true platform company. You had box companies, AV companies, on-premise. And you look at Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday, there's no equivalent security cloud. And that was a big goal for us. And part of starting the company was making sure that I had investors also that saw the vision that there needed to be a platform company in security. So we had the runway to do that. We started with endpoint, and I can tell you, in 2011, saying you were going to do endpoint security from the cloud was a scary thing. People were like, that's never going to work, and it's scary in the cloud, and big banks were like, we're never going to use that. They're all our customers now. So for me, lessons learned in working in a place, and a great experience, but that was all on-premise and signature-based. I thought everything should look like Salesforce and not like Siebel, and I saw the industry moving in that direction. So our biggest focus was that we didn't shortcut to just an AV product. We built a true endpoint platform, and we had investors that were patient enough to allow us to see that vision forward. And now all of the point players are falling away, all the legacy players are falling away, and the platform is really carrying the day for us.
So John, thank you for that. And I think people would always ask me, well, what are the comps to CrowdStrike? And Mike would ask me this question, and I'd said ServiceNow, Salesforce, Workday. They weren't cyber companies, and that's how we had to look at it as investors. And Fred wanted to be here today, founded ServiceNow. But unfortunately, he had to pull out on us, but for unrelated to coronavirus, something else. But maybe next year we'll get him back to talk about, I went for a walk with him this summer. He was talking about going from the third phase of now to the fourth phase. He started it, he grew it up. He brought in Frank Slootman to run it, and it went from about 500 million to 20 billion. Then he brought in John Donahue to take it from 20 billion to 50 billion. He says, I'm ready for my next phase. I'd like to talk to you about phase 4. And I want to go from 50 billion to 100 billion or 200 billion. So, okay, so, and he says, I got to change my board. I've got to change my executive team. I've got to change, just about everything, right? And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And in about 6 weeks, he did all that. He brought in, the fellow from SAP, Bill McDermott, to run it. He board swapped out, new CFO, new head of sales. And so, John, I kind of, we're talking about building an organization. There's some things that you did at Cisco that were, you really mastered the art of building replicable processes, but you also swapped out the people along the way. Talk about the balance of scaling and having replicable processes, yet always, looking for the people that can take it to the next level as part of the team, and balancing that out, systemizing the process.
I got it, and I'll go in the reverse order. Starting with the startups in this room, the mistake that you often make is you'll wait too long to make the changes in your organization that you should have made. And that's the number one mistake everyone in this room will make. For your investors, you've got to give them help on that, knowing when you have to change. Secondly, just the data that you referred to, Jamie. We had Pankaj, I think, 7 heads of engineering over time. I had 8 CFOs.
So he's hard to work for, you're telling us.
No. I finally figured out he was the right one to run it, and Yvette was the right one to be his wing woman. And we were able to really make the machine run. But I made the mistake too often of getting people that had a little bit more skill than what I needed. But when you compound at 65% growth per year, you do the math on that. You're doubling your head count every year and a half. You're suddenly 3 years later to skill that leader has never managed. And I found 2 things had to happen. Most of them couldn't scale, and so we would rotate through it. But I also, if you left them in a job more than 4 years, they got stale, lost their creativity, you needed to move them over. Now, the fun thing about being independent and not having customers I have to worry about in the direct sense is I can be pretty candid on the mistakes made. One of the worst mistakes you can make is to change the majority of your leadership team at one time. And the only thing worse than that is to change half your leadership team at one time and change the layer below them at the same time. Yeah. You've got so many challenges at motion, you don't know cause and effect, and you really risk it. If you're lucky and good, and you've got to be both, you can manage through multiple layers. But that will get companies into trouble. And often, using the example I liked when you said, I missed on the sales rep guy, but I don't think you went in and changed the sales lead and the next line of managers and the reps down through. That's what companies often make the mistake of doing. So if I had it to do over, I probably would have recruited about half the talent, already having the skill and size that I'd need 3 or 4 years later, and trusted that I'd be able to grow at that rate. And about half, you want the people who will shake the tree, haven't done it before, and really force you to think out of the box on it.
And Jamie, if I can add to that too, because I think it's really a relevant point and comments well taken. I look back in terms of the things I've done. Not one time have I ever regretted that I fired someone too fast. That's right. Not one time. It's always I waited too long. Me too. And my takeaway, and I talked to a lot of folks, is the same thing. Obviously, you have loyalty, family, and you're trying to hope somebody will scale, and they won't get there. And the simple thing that I've really lived by and learned over the years to make this happen is every day I rehire the people. In my mind, I rehire them, and I say, in my head, what I know about this person today, are they right fit for the job? And would I hire them again? If the answer is no, then, and it doesn't mean they're bad people, it means maybe there's a mismatch in when they came into where we are at the phase of the company, then I give them, as big a hug on the way out as on the way in. And to this day, I'm friends with many of the people that I had to move on. Yeah. But if I didn't do that, we would never have gotten to the phase that we are today. And that was, I would say, one of my biggest lessons learned is to be able to do that very quickly.
I think also to that, and I know this is controversial, I always believed in ranking my team top to bottom. And as you rank them in terms of 50% on current contribution, 50% on future contribution, you want to make sure you're treating people fairly. You often discover income disparities. Often you have gender pay disparities that suddenly become obvious. It's an important process to go through on it. And then when you have a cultural mismatch, You just got to get them out of your group. And that is so key to the future. I didn't quite finish the thought earlier that if you watch, your average person is going to be with your company only for 2.5 years. It's going to require a different leadership style and a different execution to operate in that environment. And there'll be some of you who will build a family-oriented, I want the turnover to be, and you can do the math, sub 10%, which is a really good job in today's market, maybe even sub 5. But that's going to require a different relationships with your employees. You're there when they need you, a different relationship with customers, because you're right, George. The customers who bought the most from us at Cisco were the ones that had a problem, and we helped them through it.
Yep.
My lead marketing person said, let's create a problem for every customer, and our sales will go up. And I said, let's think about it. But Jamie, I'll watch you. You build trust and relationship with your family, your friends, the people in this hotel, et cetera. Many people don't realize how powerful that ecosystem is and how unique it is, candidly, to California. You don't see the same speed anywhere else in the world, and you definitely don't see it in Boston. You're beginning to see subsets of it in Texas. But you practice that all the time yourself.
Yeah. It's, I mean, you know, there's a lesson there, and I got a great mentor here, and I've had some great mentors throughout my life. And John, you're a tremendous role model for all of us. And, you know, it's about, a lot of it is just building up that social capital that maybe one day you need. I mean, you know, I got to say, this hotel, it's our 17th conference, and one year they're going to do a walkout. And I came and met with the employees. I said, you can't walk out. I mean, you know, I love you guys. You can't do that to me. And we love you too. We can't do it either. You know, that was it, right?
Are we talking about
no labor lawyer has ever said they loved everyone. You know, it's just like, you know, I love you. You can't walk out on me. You know, but then the hotel manager's leaving to North Carolina after this. But he said, you know, I have a fiscal year, I have a calendar year and an academic year, but the most important thing to me is that your summit is a success. And after that summit, I'm going to go move to North Carolina with my family and take a new job. And, you know, that's like, wow. I mean, that's the loyalty that you build. And,
yes,
you know, it means something to me. And, you know, and I really appreciate that. And we try and, you know, we just had the most wonderful time in Australia, you know, with our spouses. And it was like, you know, it's just great. You build these relationships, and you're going to have ups and downs in business. George and I are very close. But that's what gets us through and helps us be so I mean, we've been very fortunate. But John, but let me ask you a question on that. If you had to say, what was the message you would give to the George's 49? What message would you give to the 49-year-old John Chambers? What's the advice would you give him?
Or to the people in the room, or investors looking at where you invest?
Or maybe yourself. Make it personal. You know, you know, I should have done this.
My advice would be: people often accuse me of dreaming too big, taking too much risk, spreading myself too thin.
Yeah.
I would have dreamed bigger. I would have taken more risk. I would have spread myself thinner.
Oh, there you go. All right.
Secondly, as you grow, and this is one of the lessons learned the hard way, and I had to figure it out over time. Jack Welch at GE helped teach me, number 1 or number 2, or don't compete. I added to that, never enter market unless I can get 40% market share. And if I couldn't get it, I exited it on it. You want to be realistic and dream bigger. You want to say, what does it take to be the 1 or 2 player? Because I tell you, as an investor, if you're number 4 or 5, you're not going to last very long. You're either going to get acquired or you're going to die. And if you think what you're going to do, are the 5 actions you're going to do this year going to move you dramatically closer to either maintaining your number 1 or 2 position or help you get you there? Those are your right priorities. If the answer you're in a fast-growing market and the things that you do are not going to dramatically change your position, you're doing the same thing too long, and you're going to get into real trouble. So one of the things I learned the best is to only invest in companies that, in my opinion, have the chance to be the 1 or 2 player in their category with 40% market share. An unrealistic goal, but actually very doable. At Cisco, out of the 18 major products, when I left and Pankaj and Yvette left, we were number 1 in 12, number 2 in 4, and number 3 in only 2. And the markets where we weren't there, we just exited on it. It forces you to think about the market entirely differently.
All right. Well, let me kind of ask another question, though, change the pace. You know, as a leader, you've got to make hard decisions. George, I'll start with you. And John, you talked about replicable processes for acquisitions, for retaining people, whatnot. George, what's your playbook for crisis management?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is just be candid and honest, and I think that's part of our culture is to, and I'm an East Coast guy, so I sort of tell it the way it is, and
He's a Jersey guy.
What's that?
More specific, you're from Jersey.
Yeah, for a Jersey guy, right? So you may not like it, but I try to be very, candid. So I think get everybody together, focus on what we need to do, and, if the customer's involved, what's the impact? Make sure that the team and comms are set up appropriately because everything breaks down in terms of comms and people do different things. And then probably similar to John, everybody has a role. Everything is scripted out to the minute in terms of what we do. I mean, it's one playbook. We use things like GDocs and everything is in there and it's formulaic and nothing happens by accident. And where things go awry is when people sort of go off the plan or the reservation and they don't know what they're doing. They don't know the communication, whether it's internal or external. And you just realize you're going to make some mistakes in doing that. But if you kind of stick to the playbook, you can still recover from those. And the thing that, again, we hang our hat on is not hiding behind something, just saying, hey, if we screwed up, we screwed up. We'll make it right. We'll deal with it. But we want to work with whatever situation we have at hand and realize we're not going to have precise information. And whatever play we draw up, we know it will never operate exactly like that. So as long as we go in with those core principles, we generally come out well on the other side.
John, short answer on that. Playbook for crisis? Yeah.
Number one, don't hide. Number two, be realistic and transparent on how much was self-inflicted, how much was market. Number three, outline to all the constituencies, your employees, your shareholders, your customers, the media, what is your plan to get healthy again? What will it take to get there? Tell them you hear the quarter reports, you're going to go back out to them and you report on a quarterly report basis all the way through. And something I know you and Bert, your CFO, do remarkably well, under promise, over deliver as you come out of it. It sounds basic. How many of those did Facebook do? Zero.
I was going to refer to the Iranian government.
How many did Uber do? Zero.
General Thomas took care of that for us, but yeah. All right, so
Okay.
Let's go on this one, George. June 12th, 2019. Push the button, market opens, we go upstairs. The book is forming. What did it feel like? What was your emotion at that time?
It's an incredible process, and it starts well before that, right?
Yeah.
In terms of just, going through it for the first time, just how hard it is to become a public company and how high the bar is and all the things you have to do right, from the beginning. And Bert and I worked 3 years in advance of it to make it all happen. I think though when it first opens and you see just, the interest and what's happening and the excitement, it's great. I mean, I was excited, but I think one of the things I was really excited about were for the early employees.
Yeah.
And just to see their faces and their wives, and their lives change. It was amazing.
Within minutes of opening, this gentleman from Minnesota, who was one of his co-founders, employee zero, shows me the picture of the biggest house in Minneapolis, which he's buying. It hadn't even priced yet. It was like, it hadn't even opened yet. He already picked out the house. So there was some excitement there.
You have to manage expectations.
You're kind of like, guys,
But it was a life-changing event.
I got to tell you, the next day I went over to see Michael Bloomberg, and he's a genius, and I'm sure he'll play an important role in going forward here. And I thought, what am I going to say to this guy, and because but I found I practiced with Mike Milken. I mean, he's a genius, so I had to get him to show me a special, his favorite button on the Bloomberg machine. So I got him to do that. But what was interesting is I was thinking about if I was going to start Bloomberg today, how would I do it? And there's a business model out there like that. It's CrowdStrike. You crowdsource all the information, you put it in the system, you run your machine learning algorithms over it, you get incredible insights. He goes, well, that makes a lot of sense, So you got a fan of Michael Bloomberg. So now that he's off the trail, we got to go call on him. But it was just, but it was a magical week for us. But there was, the families were there. But it's quite but it's also daunting because George gets up and announces he's going to go see a 100 companies in 100 days. And I'm pretty sure it was just a ploy to keep the jet, right? I mean, you know, but it actually worked, didn't it?
But it was a good work.
It was a good work anyway.
It worked.
But so it was like a launching pad rather than an end point. But the emotional just must have been wonderful for you and your wife, and your kids were there. It was just John, you've been through that.
It goes back to culture. And I know what you enjoyed the most. It wasn't your success or your emotion.
Yeah.
It was your team wins in a big way. And there's nothing like that rush. We created 10,000 millionaires at Cisco, and 1 million could buy you a house in California. And the rush that does for you is amazing on that. And it overrides almost all the other feelings that it's your success. Then you've got to raise the bar and get people going.
I didn't have any money in 1994 when I first met John, and I was ushering at church, and this old gentleman had just taken his lump sum from Alexander and Baldwin, $10 million, and he was my co-usher together at church, and he was asking me for advice on investments. So I put him into like 4 stocks, including Cisco. Now his kids and grandkids are fighting over the estate because they did so well. Would have been so much easier if he hadn't invested. But anyway, we made him a fortune, John. Anyway, but you know, it's incredible the impact you guys had. I got to say though, George, we started off the roadshow just the weekend before. We're in Monaco at the Grand Prix with Mercedes and some big customers. Your hobby is racing cars. What does that tell you about you, car racing as a hobby? Yeah.
Well, I think it's a couple things. I like winning, but I hate losing more. And that's actually one of the questions I ask every person I hire. I said, what drives you more, the will to win or the hatred to lose?
Yeah.
And I actually had this conversation with a Formula One driver, and he said, well, I love winning. I go, that's the wrong answer. The best people hate to lose more than they love to win. And we all want to win, but I can tell you when I win a race, it's good for like a day. When I lose, I'm sick for 2 weeks over this thing.
I completely agree.
Right? So, you know, for me, in racing and a hobby is a couple things. One is it's attention to detail. It's a team sport. Even though you're driving the car and it's fun, you can't win without the team. And if you don't look at the highest level of racing, if you don't look at every detail and you have a plan and a formula and a checklist and you're just diligent on it, you will never be good. So for me, I take a lot of that and, you know, a lot of what we do in racing and we apply to CrowdStrike. Everything is formulaic. Everything has a plan. Everything has a purpose. And you know, I like going fast. I like, you know, winning, and that's my personality.
Yeah, that's it. That's the culture there. It's a winning team, right?
Yeah.
Competitive winning team. John, you fish. You take a group of your execs and close associates to Alaska every year. Pankos is trying to figure out how to get out of it this year. But talk about that event and your hobbies, fishing, hunting. You know, what does it tell about you? I mean,
well, I think one of the common characteristics you see among most of the CEOs is they're unusually risk-taking, and that makes you uncomfortable as an investor on it. But I love to fly helicopters. I love to dive off of high things. I take the team fishing because if you take 12 young CEOs, and we're going to see, Jamie, if we can do this or not, we're trying to build...
He's going to put me in front of the grizzly bear, I know.
Yeah. We're trying to build 8 unicorns out of 18 companies or maybe more. You have a chance when you spend a week with people out in the wild. Everything is scripted for what we want to do there. I bring 10 people who are very experienced who are assigned to certain people on certain days to fish with them for half a day to say deal with diversity or deal with innovation, or they're a little bit too tough on their employees, here's what we need for you to do. And each night we do toast, and they know I'm going to call them spontaneously, but you create the fun competition about what did you learn on the day and how do you drive it through. And when you see Gustavo, who I think is here, and from New York, never been fishing in his life, and he comes around the turn and you have a wild grizzly bear there who's 12 feet tall in the air. And these aren't the ones that pose with you in the parks catching the fish. These are the ones that are the real wild ones that unfortunately can be pretty dangerous. But you learn an awful lot about a person in that type of environment. And of course, we weren't going to let anything happen to him. We got too much invested in him.
No, we do.
But
what's our
you
key
watch
man
them under
policy?
stress, and then you watch them come together in chemistry and teamwork. And most of the CEOs come out of that saying, I learned more about culture. I learned about how to use the senior players you brought more effectively. I've learned from my peers how to do it than they do perhaps in a year of their total working lives.
Wow.
So it's a unique time to bring them together in a way that builds a different bond and to dream together and to build off of each other's dreams and learn from each other's mistakes.
What a great way to end. John, George, thank you so much for your contributions to the entrepreneurial community, to the innovation economy, your work here throughout the world. George, your mission to make the Western world safe from nation-state threats and bad actors. Thank both of you. Thank you for being here and sharing your insights with us. And, friends for life, as John say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.